Last week, we looked at what happens if the Pelicans win the title. This week, let's take a look at the opposite approach. What if everything goes wrong and the Pelicans miss the playoffs? Do they retool, clean house, trade Zion? We'll break it all down in a What If Wednesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Wednesday, deep off-season part of the year for Locked On Pelicans. So we're doing What If Wednesdays, where we are looking at different scenarios for the Pelicans here. We looked at what happens if they win the title, what happens in the subsequent seasons from that, and gave you an answer on that. Today, let's do the opposite, though. What if the Pelicans miss the playoffs? Absolutely disaster scenario for New Orleans. We'll break down why it would have gone wrong this season. There's two ways that could have happened, and then what it means for subsequent years and what that looks like. And there is a correct path to go down if they end up missing the playoffs and have to kind of go with some of this dramatic action, maybe is the way to put it. But of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday during the season, breaking down everything you want to know about the Pelicans team, the #1 Pelicans podcast out there. If you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday, or at least Monday, Wednesday, live show Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. It's the best way to support it. And you're going to know everything that's going on with the team. And we drop some good inside information here on Locked On Pelicans. And now for your second listen, go check out Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson, breaking down everything black and gold over there. So let's get into it. The Pelicans miss the postseason. Honestly, for me, a good realistic season for them this year is the 4th or 5th seed in the Western Conference, like borderline being a home court advantage team in the first round of the playoffs. If they don't do that, I think it's a big disappointment. I think getting just into the play-in tournament is a disappointment. But missing the playoffs entirely, like they did this past year, oh boy, that's not good. And so this could go wrong for two reasons. You know, the first and foremost one is health. They're injured. Zion doesn't play very many games. Brandon Ingram maybe doesn't play very many games, and other injuries occur. And it's kind of like last year, right? Up and down, not good enough, though, at the end to even win a play-in tournament game and get into the postseason. So health is the main one. And if the health falls apart, look, they're not going to go that far. This team will go as far as their two stars carry them. And even one of those stars can take you pretty far to the postseason at least, though not a top 4 seed, not the 5th seed, play-in tournament team maybe at best. But at least you could do that. But if you don't even get that far with things, it means Zion hasn't been healthy. And look, if Zion hasn't been healthy, depending on what type of injury it is, it likely means that switch, the proverbial switch, has not flipped for him. And if that's the case, we'll get into it in the next segment. You can see it if you're watching on YouTube. It's the time to trade him. You know, same with Brandon Ingram. This is a guy that's going to be due big money. You look at some of the deals that get given out in the NBA right now, and they're kind of mind-blowing, right? Jaylen Brown at $305 million, 305 over 5 years, 5-year deal. That's insane. That's insane money. Now it's a percentage of the salary cap. Salary cap's going up. But if Brandon Ingram doesn't stay healthy this year for whatever reason, are you going to be comfortable giving him a contract like that? Or is it time to potentially retool? And if these guys don't stay healthy, it's been reported they're retooling the player performance and care team. That clearly then didn't work. It's just an overall disaster. That means you've got to make bigger changes, which is what we'll get to in the next segment of Locked On Pelicans. The other route that is maybe even worse, is what if things just don't work out? They're healthy and they're just not good. The offense is still bad. Maybe the defense regresses. Maybe there's just not enough shooting on this team, on this roster, and they're just not good, right? Like I don't really envision a world where that is the case. I was just on Locked On Fantasy Basketball. I was talking about it a lot on yesterday's show and said, if they're healthy, like they should be good. Like there's almost no reason for them not to be good if this team is healthy. If somehow that happens, I mean, it's going to lead to a similar scenario of what you need to do next, which is basically just not necessarily clean house, but you still come to the same conclusion that just everything is untenable, right? You just can't do this anymore and keep going down the road that you've been going down because it hasn't worked. You've made some changes. It hasn't worked. You can't then just run it back like you have this year. This year, they're saying if we get healthy, we'll be okay. I agree with them. I think most people agree with them. National experts agree with that. They might not bank on the team being healthy, but they do agree with the fact of if they're healthy, this team should be good. That's kind of the big overall question, right? It's really as simple as that. So I don't really believe in a scenario where they are healthy but not good. So I think that's at least kind of ruling one of these out. But if they don't stay healthy, if Zion misses a ton of games, if Brandon Ingram misses a ton of games, if there's some other injury there, you have to then probably make wholesale big changes, particularly on the player side, because at this point it is an untenable situation. Does that mean trading Zion? Does that mean trading Brandon Ingram? Or does it mean more of like a retool where one of those guys maybe goes? What's that look like? What's it mean for subsequent seasons after this one, this coming one for the New Orleans Pelicans? And I'll give you the way they should probably operate if the worst case scenario does end up happening. So that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we get to that, though, I'm excited to tell you about FanDuel because they got an awesome promotion going on right now. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to win all season long because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, Derek Carr going to take the Saints to the promised land here. You can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for each victory. And you can use your bonus bets on the spread, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Give me the Saints and give me extra money every time they win a game. They don't play good quarterbacks this year. That makes me pretty excited about what they're going to be capable of doing. Today, what we're hoping won't happen is the Pelicans missing the postseason because that represents a doomsday scenario here. So we're going to break down what happens next, right now, if that ends up coming to fruition, which I really don't think it will. But of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday for y'all, breaking down everything you want to know about the Pels, the #1 Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So if they miss the postseason, it's horrible. And I said they could do it one of two ways. They just, health goes wrong and they don't win and we deal with a season like we saw last year, like we've seen before, and it's not really a lot of fun. Or for whatever reason, they're not good and they just miss out. Regardless of how it happens, it's an outright disaster. And I even do think the play-in tournament would be disappointing, but at least that's something. And if you end up with a disappointing season, particularly missing the postseason, it's time for a fresh start. It's time to admit this just didn't work out. It was a failure, and it's time for a fresh start. And that means trading Zion Williamson. It means trading Brandon Ingram and going full-on tank/rebuild. Simple as that. Simple as that. And I mean trading both of them. I wouldn't build around either at that point in time. I don't want to build necessarily around Brandon Ingram as your main guy on whatever kind of contract extension, new deal that you would need to pay him and how much money that will be. I love Brandon Ingram. He's a good player. But if you're just trying to rebuild, there's no need to do that. Trade him, get as many assets for him as possible. When it comes to Zion, you hope that his value isn't so low that you don't get a good return for him. I think you could get stuff for him, but it wouldn't be sort of the massive haul that you would have expected from him for him a year or two ago. And it's going to be one of those things where you look back with hindsight being 2020, and the Pelicans were interested in Scoot Henderson, trading with Portland to be able to draft him at 3 overall. David Griffin has said the right things of no, Zion Williamson was never included, all that. Not so sure about that, but anyway, maybe at that point it would have been, you look back and you're like, you know what, we should have traded Zion and a pick for the 3rd overall pick to get Scoot Henderson. And now you're going into a draft where you don't feel as good about some of these players. They're not Scoot Henderson's ceiling, and you missed out, and it feels like it sets the team back further. However, you still trade Zion Williamson, recoup what you can, and go into what I would call a rebuild very similar to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder, after losing both Westbrook and Kevin Durant, I think made excellent, smart moves. They brought in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from the Clippers. That was a great thing for them to do, trading Paul George over there. And when they got him in, they realized they had a superstar that was a couple of years away. And he has blossomed into an all-NBA guy and is awesome. One of the best scorers in the league. And they had cap space. And instead of trying to compete right away, you could argue they wasted the first 2-3 years of Shai's career. He's like 4 years in. I forget exactly what he is. Now I'm kind of curious. I'm going to look it up in the moment here. And they used their cap space not to sign players that were going to help them win. Not to trade for players that were going to help them win. They traded for bad contracts and acquired extra picks. This is essentially renting out your cap space. This is what the Pelicans are looking for in a partner to essentially dump Kira Lewis Jr. right now. They want to get rid of that contract. They don't want to have it on the books. So what they're going to do is try and trade him to a team with cap space, which doesn't really exist right now, and go, for bringing him on the bad contract and using your cap space on this guy, we'll give you an asset. Ideally, 2nd-round picks is what's used in deals like this. The Pelicans don't really have those to give. We did a show on that somewhat recently. They're going to, you get assets for that. So you clear cap space. You trade away Brandon Ingram for as many expiring deals as possible in draft picks. Same with Zion. Trade CJ too. And at that point, I don't know if you need to move anyone else necessarily, but if you can clear cap space, you do it. If it means giving up good players, because then when teams start dumping bad contracts, other players, you go, yeah, we got the space. We'll take that guy on. You got to give us a 1st-round pick. The Thunder, you could argue, have a better war chest of assets than the Pelicans do right now, and maybe a better group of young players. Maybe they've drafted well. They have a bona fide superstar in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We'll see what they have in Chet Holmgren here too. But they're in a very good position to kind of do whatever they want and keep growing. They also have replacement guys ready if and when someone gets too expensive for that team. So with all of that, they're in a fantastic spot. That looks like a team that is massively on the rise, right? Like they've kind of supplanted the Pelicans as that like young up-and-coming team that you want to watch, that you got to worry about in the Western Conference. So you try and become that. And it means trading these guys, clearing cap space, and then using that cap space smartly. It's a bit of a process, if you will, from the Philadelphia 76ers. It's not fun. It means you're going to lose a lot of games and you might be disinterested in the team. But when they start to get good again in the future, and you can time this well with other teams starting to blow things up and new windows opening up, you can become, a potential powerhouse, assuming you draft well and get a little bit lucky in the draft lottery and things like that. But that's the route they would need to go. At this point, you couldn't keep Zion. You couldn't keep Brandon Ingram. You just need to move on and go, this was a failure. I've long said you only do that as a last resort, I think. If it goes sideways this year, particularly with injuries, I don't think part of it is just like a human nature thing. Do you have it in you to get like your hopes up again? To go, okay, this is the year the switch is going to flip for Zion Williamson. This is the year that he's going to be healthy. I say it every year. One, because you kind of need to. You don't want to live and be miserable. But at a certain point, the track record against it is so strong that I would be here on the show saying all of this and probably not believing it when I say it. And I do believe it now. But a year from now, if everything goes wrong, I'm not entirely sure. And I don't know if you listeners would even have that in you. Maybe I'll put that as the question on YouTube. You know, if it goes sideways this year, could you talk yourself into this team, you know, getting healthy and doing it again? Or is it like, I just don't care anymore and I'm tired and I want to give up? Even discussing this out loud is exhausting to me in a sense. So I think you've got to trade those guys, start fresh, and not put fans through something like that again. I think you would almost see a little mini fan revolt when it comes to something like that. But it doesn't just stop with the players. I have long said you go down with the Zion ship, and if he gets hurt this year, that ship has sunk. Okay, so what about the captains of the ship, the people on the boat, the staff, the front office, the coaching staff as well? What happens then? That, I think, is a little bit different. And let's talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday. Well, Monday, Wednesday, live show Thursday in this deep part of the off season. But we'll be back to Monday through Friday before you even know it. The #1 Pelicans podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's why I say your second listen should be the Locked On Saints podcast with Ross Jackson, who I saw this weekend. Awesome guy, really, like, truly one of the nicest humans I know, and giving you all the insight you need into everything black and gold. That dude just kills it, y'all. So make sure you're catching up with him for everything black and gold, Saints, and training camp. And of course, become an everydayer of Locked On Pelicans or an everydayer of Locked On Saints. Listen Monday through Friday. It's the best way you can support both the shows, and comment down below on YouTube. Sounds like a lot, but it all takes like 30 seconds to be able to kind of set all of this up. So we're talking, what if the Pels miss the playoffs? The doomsday scenario for this team. You clean house. It's not a retool. It's not a, we'll trade Zion, we'll get some stuff, we'll build around Brandon Ingram. I think you've got to just go blank slate, tear it all down, and we're going to go through a trust the process Philadelphia 76ers style rebuild. I think you have to do that. This chair makes so much noise at times. So that is the direction that I would hope the team would go. The question then becomes, who makes that who makes the trades? Who makes those decisions? Is that David Griffin? I don't know if they would fire David Griffin right off the bat or if they would give him another year to try and just do some things here, because are people going to really want this job? And if you hire someone else, you have to know that this is like a 6 to 7 year job for them, not a 3-year quick little turnaround. And if people don't think that you're going to get that kind of rope with ownership, and that if they fire David Griffin, you bring someone in, it's like 3 years and there you go. This is not a 3-year thing. It's a longer term thing to being a true contender, I think, at that point, that it might scare off good candidates from taking the job. You would get somebody, don't get me wrong. There's only 30 of these jobs in the world. But it might not be the most appealing job to some of the top candidates at that point in time. Knowing that your first act is going to have to be trading away Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, all of that. It also could attract people, right? Cool. Tear it down. Do whatever the heck you want. You got free reign here. You know, you're not worried about paying the luxury tax or anything like that. It resets you with everything. And so I can see it going either way. You know, maybe you give David Griffin a year to just kind of tear that down, start doing the thing, and then you get rid of him after a year. You know, Christian Clark of The Advocate reported that he had signed an extension, so maybe they don't want to eat that money, though I think at that point maybe you should. Because I do think a new person would come in, make the trades they want to make, and then evaluate the rest of the roster too. You know, do you want to build around Trey Murphy? On Locked On Fantasy Basketball, Josh Lloyd is very, very high on Trey Murphy's potential being like a near all-star level guy. You can build around that. You can build around that. Young guy would be on a decent deal, it'd be a max like rookie extension, but that's still a decent contract to kind of build around. You have some interesting young pieces in Jordan Hawkins, in Dyson Daniels, and others. Herb Jones too. You know, if you were to fire David Griffin, bring in someone new, kind of tear it all down, what do you then do with the coaching staff? And I don't think they would get rid of Willie Green. I think ownership loves Willie Green. They want to keep Willie Green. The players seem to have a lot of respect for Willie Green too. He does well with some of these young guys. I think you keep him here, but he might not then be your long-term coach of the future, which isn't a great position for him to be in, but you're still an NBA head coach. So yeah, that's probably what you do. So you fire David Griffin, keep Willie Green, knowing that in like 2 or 3 years, 2 years probably, you can bring in a new head coach that you want to kind of lead your newly rebuilt team to try and start having some success then. So it's really almost, other than the coach and the coaching staff, like an entire just gut job minus some players. Like I wouldn't trade Trey Murphy. I wouldn't trade Herb Jones at that point in time either. You know, I'd keep Dyson Daniels. I'd keep Hawkins, EJ Liddell, and some of the other young guys on the team that you feel could be something special. But everyone else, CJ, Brandon Ingram, Zion, I don't want to do this anymore, and I want to start using cap space very smartly, because that new collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, gets very restrictive, and that's going to mean you have a lot of leverage in deals and you can get a lot of future assets. And for a small market team that wants to build some sustainability and play within kind of the small market confines of everything, that really does seem like the way to go. Another Oklahoma City Thunder style rebuild. I think they've done a really good job with what they've built around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and how they've managed the salary cap, the drafting that they've done, trades that they've made. That would be the way to go for the Pelicans. But if Zion can't stay healthy, if Ingram can't stay healthy, or they just miss the playoffs for whatever reason, it's time to wash your hands of this mess. You went down with the ship, and what else are you supposed to do? It's kind of how it goes. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Live show, YouTube, Thursday, 7 p.m. Central. I will see you there. Talk with y'all. We'll have a topic. I'll answer your questions. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. We'll probably talk some trades. We'll talk other things as well. So I hope you join me. I'll get that kind of posted on there so you have the link to everything very soon with all of that. And as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all Thursday, 7 p.m. Central.